The person left years ago. Why didn't the problem leave too? Wimpy walks into the room with no money. No grill. No spatula. No hamburger stand. No buns. No lettuce. No tomatoes. No meat. Nothing. All he has is a sentence. "I'll gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today." Most people hear that and laugh. A detective hears something else. A detective hears the beginning of a case. Because Wimpy is not hiding his plan. He is not sneaking around. He is not disguising his intentions. He is telling you exactly what he is about to do. Watch me obtain a hamburger without the necessary fee. That is the whole confession. But here is where the investigation turns. Wimpy cannot make the story happen by himself. Somebody has to make the hamburger. Popeye has to participate. Before there is a debt, there has to be a hamburger. Before there is a Tuesday, there has to be a hamburger. Before there is a grievance, there has to be a hamburger. That is the part most people miss. Everybody watches Wimpy. The detective watches Popeye. Everybody asks why Wimpy never pays. The detective asks why Wimpy keeps getting hamburgers. That is a different question. And a different question opens a different case. Because once you see this pattern in Wimpy, you start seeing it everywhere. The person leaves. The problem stays. The argument ends. The anger stays. The event is over. The case stays open. Years pass. The story keeps breathing. Now wait a minute. If the person was the problem should have left with the person. If the argument was the problem should have ended with the argument. If the event was the problem should have disappeared when the event disappeared. But that is not what happens. Ty is not in the room, but Ty is still being discussed. Jose is gone, but Jose is still being carried. Wimpy is nowhere near Tuesday, but Popeye is still waiting. Something does not add up. That is where the detective stops. Not at the person, not at the event, not at the old conversation. The detective stops at the thing that remained. What kept the problem alive after the person left? That is the real investigation. Because a grievance does not survive on the person. It survives on participation. The mind keeps handing it hamburgers. Attention is a hamburger. Rehearsal is a hamburger. Resentment is a hamburger. The story is a hamburger. The replay is a hamburger. The old argument is a hamburger. The imagined comeback is a hamburger. The expectation is a hamburger. And every time the mind feeds it, the grievance gets another Tuesday. That is why the person can be gone, and the problem can still feel present. Not because the person still has authority, but because participation is still being supplied. The same thing happened with Jose. Jose got fired from his job. Then later he came back. He thought he knew the safe combination. At least he assumed he did. But when he got there, the combination had been changed. That is the detective clue. What made Jose think the combination would still be the same? Reality had moved on. His assumption had not. And that is how a grievance works. Reality says this happened. The grievance says this should not have happened. Reality says it is over. The grievance says I am not finished. Reality says the person is gone. The grievance says keep the file open. That is the gap. The gap between what is and what the mind expected. The gap between today and Tuesday. The gap between the event and the story about the event. The gap between reality and the assumption reality never agreed to. That is where suffering hides. Not always in what happened, but in the continued argument with what happened. The ego works exactly like Wimpy. It makes promises. It says peace is coming later. Happiness is coming later. Completion is coming later. Security is coming later. Specialness is coming later. I will gladly pay you Tuesday for your life today. And the mind keeps accepting the offer. Not because Tuesday has ever paid, but because Tuesday always sounds close enough to believe. That is the trick. Tuesday never has to arrive. It only has to be promised. The ego never has to deliver peace. It only has to keep peace in the future. The grievance never has to solve anything. It only has to keep the case open. And as long as the case stays open, the mind keeps participating. That is why the question matters. The person left years ago. Why did not the problem leave too? Because the person left, but the participation stayed. The event ended, but the feeding continued. The case was over, but the file kept being reopened. And when participation stops, authority disappears. Wimpy loses authority. Ty loses authority. Jose loses authority. The grievance loses authority. Not because they changed, because the power was never really there. It was in the agreement. It was in the attention. It was in the repeated yes. It was in the hamburger being handed over again. A Course in Miracles keeps bringing the mind back to this one correction. The problem is not outside. The cause is not outside. The authority is not outside. The mind is not trapped by what left. The mind is only confused by what it continues to feed. So the detective does not ask, "Why did Wimpy fail to pay?" The detective asks, "Why did the hamburger keep getting made?" The detective does not ask, "Why is this person still hurting me?" The detective asks, "How is this still being supplied?" Because once the supply ends, the whole arrangement collapses. No hamburger, no Tuesday, no debt, no grievance, no authority. Just what is. And what is was never waiting for Tuesday.